This is Kyka. She's a character that I've created, and I've recorded a whole video tutorial series on how to design and create a character in 3D for film. We're going to go over modeling as well as texture and groom, costume creation, and look dev, lighting, and rendering, as well as many other subjects. I'll have an entire playlist of videos that really go into a deep dive on how to create a really fascinating and highly detailed character or creature. This is Kyka's model in Houdini. And when we look at her renders, we're trying to create something that's really captivating at a high level to an audience. So we'll be talking a great deal about the design philosophy that goes into this, as well as the mechanics of actually making a creature like this. We'll cover Maya and ZBrush, as well as Mari for textures. And there will be tons of Houdini and also Solaris and RenderMan. So we're going to go over the blocking stage for Kyka. And this is very exciting. Starting a new character and having a fresh Maya scene is, pretty fun stage of the project because, you're excited at the beginning. And there's a few things to sort of start off with so that we start off on the right track. And the first thing is just to get your concept art, assuming you have it, into Maya. And one thing to notice about this is that this is a perspective view of our character. I think in games, sometimes you'll get concept art that is perfect sort of front and side view. In VFX, we usually don't get that. I don't think I've ever gotten that. What we get is a concept art painting or some photos. But if it's a concept art painting, it's usually in perspective like this. So what we have to do is sort of build our character in a way that is at origin and facing straight down the axis, right? So the Z axis. And so how do we do that when our concept art is not that way? Our concept art is in perspective. So I'll show you a couple of things here that allow us to do that using image planes. All right, so there's two types of image planes in Maya. The one that I've created here, this is a free image plane. And you can move it around anywhere. This one is at origin, roughly. And then I've moved it up to the point where the character's height should be. And this is very important because you want to establish correct scale very early on in your build stage. And scale can be a little technical and a little tricky, right? So Maya works in centimeters, and you never want to change that. If you go to the Maya preferences, you'll see that the default is centimeters, and you are technically allowed to change it, but it's buggy. Maya works well in centimeters. I would not change that setting. But a lot of times when you work in a studio, there's something called a studio scale. The studios that I've worked at are decimeters. So if you convert this into decimeters, so we have 12.1 units. And one way to do this is if you just open a browser and type it into Google. So 12.1 decimeters is 3.969 feet. So I wanted Kyka to be roughly 4 feet tall. And in decimeters, that's 12.1 decimeters. So that's our scale check here. And this is the Maya measuring tool. Right, so if you go to create, there's a measuring tool, and it has two locators, and then this this measurement value in between. The other type of image plane is a camera. Right, so what we're seeing here on the left is an image plane that's attached to a camera that I've created. And essentially the idea is to create a couple of sort of primitive dummy objects that will let us create a camera that's aligned to the character in 3D space. So in this case, I've created these two spheres and sort of position them roughly where the character's eyes are. And you'll see that the spheres are actually they're not rotated at all. And I've simply translated it up into place and then mirrored it across the axis. Right, so that's essential. You don't want to move these around randomly. If you think of building your character with symmetry, you want this geometry to be symmetrical. Right, and you can see that I've positioned the camera according to these eyes. And you also want to sort of make some educated guesses about what the camera focal length is. Usually for characters and people, we want something like an 85 or 100 millimeter lens. I think this ended up being an 85, and I figured out that that worked pretty well for this. But sometimes there's some back and forth where you need to create your blocking geometry and then tweak your camera focal length until everything sort of fits and lines up. So these are the eyes, and I'm going to continue making some blocking geo that lets us line up the head. For the head, we're going to start with a box. And the trick here is to keep it very, very simple. It's almost like just a cage mesh, right? And we want the bare minimum amount of edge loops and geometry in order to sort of indicate and hold the shape. And it's also very important, you can see I've changed the subdivision width to 2. We want to have an edge loop that goes down the middle, right? So that's going to establish the center line of the head and the face, right? So that's a line that's going to run down the center of the forehead through the nose and then bisects the lips. And that's going to give us a lot of information about the depth of the head. Because when you're looking at a 2D concept art image, it doesn't actually tell you that information, right? So we're going to figure that out in 3D here using tools in Maya. And you can see I've switched over to the sculpt brush, and I subdivided that box just one time. So we now have kind of a smooth box. And I'm looking at both cameras, and this is one reason that I do this in Maya, is because some people would dive into ZBrush. But the nice thing about Maya is you have all these different camera options, right? So I'm able to work in the 3D viewport using the perspective camera. And we also have this really nice view with visibility of the concept art, right? So I'm able to use the sculpt tools and just kind of position this to get the silhouette of the character. I'm also using symmetry which you can see in the modeling toolkit there. So you can see already this is starting to actually take shape and give an indication of the size and proportions of the head. And trying to sort of guess about the scale of the back of the head as well. So blocking that in. And then this edge loop here is very important, right? So that's the center line. And trying to move that in Z until it matches the center of the forehead in 2D. And then that vert was matching the tip of the nose, which is also important. And then for the eyes, we're just trying to rough in the eye socket sort of position there. And then continuing to refine and just block out the size and scale of the forehead. And you can see we already have a pretty good sort of really basic representation of the character. And the point of this is that we're going to take it into ZBrush. So instead of starting with ZBrush and maybe trying to eyeball things or create the blocking mesh there, we're using all these really nice tools in Maya. And then in ZBrush, we can start sculpting with a base mesh that already has the right scale for the character, and it already has the proportions blocked in for the facial features, which is very nice. For the neck, we're going to start with a cylinder. And we'll get this just sort of lined up. And you can think of the neck as being this sort of cylindrical shape. And this is a point where you might need to adjust your camera, right? Because in this case, at least, the neck is going pretty much straight up and down. So if your camera no longer aligns, this is where you would sort of work on your camera fit. And I'm placing a few edge loops. And again, looking at both cameras here. And just kind of trying to match the silhouette. By the way, this is a split view inside Maya. There's an icon over here that does that, and then you can sort of choose which camera you want in each viewport. I often use this for UVing as well. Just scaling up the bottom, and again, matching the silhouette there. And then I'll be adding, just enough edge loops to give us a nice match. So this is what we ended up with for blocking. And next we're going to head over to ZBrush. And in ZBrush, it is possible, and you can see a setup here, to import an FBX that has your camera and image plane. It can be a bit difficult to do this, but I may have lost some hair during this process. But if you try hard enough, you can get it to look like this, and then you can change your MO or model opacity here, and you can also have a little button that will restore your camera. I think one of the main difficulties is that ZBrush is just very buggy when it comes to supporting cameras and image planes. It does not appear to support portrait-oriented images, right? So I think I had to convert this to a landscape image, right, like an HD. But if you try hard enough, you can get this this kind of setup in ZBrush where you do have your camera and your concept art. And I'm kind of just demoing how that works now in practice. The other thing you can do, and I'm showing that now, is you can use PureRef. So PureRef is a wonderful program that is an infinite canvas where you can put images as well as things like notes. And one feature of PureRef is that you can have it be transparent to mouse, and you can adjust the transparency with hotkeys, right? So what I'm doing here is I've matched it up to the image plane in ZBrush from the FBX, which is exported from Maya. And I can now use either of these kind of setups to use in the blocking. Now that we have our ZBrush project set up, we get to jump in and do some sculpting, which is exciting. We're going to take this this blocking geo that we have from Maya, and we're going to sculpt using dynamesh, as we'll see in a moment. I'm going to speed this video up, and then I'll slow it down or pause it if I have comments. And we have some different subtools you can see. It's good to have your eyes handy, and those can be a separate subtool. But I'm going to combine the head and neck with dynamesh, as you can see there. Now, one thing you can do is subdivide before you dynamesh. And then you won't have to go and smooth everything like I'm doing now. But one thing that's very helpful with this is this Smooth Stronger brush. This does come with ZBrush, but it's not in the default sort of brushes directory. The regular smooth brush I have here in my interface, and I'll provide a download link if you're interested in getting this ZBrush interface, which I think is pretty useful. But I'm using the Smooth Stronger because we have, a fair number of polygons here, and it works a little better. You don't have to wear out your pen nibs doing smoothing this way. So I highly recommend Smooth Stronger. And you can see when we dynamesh, the head and the neck are now one piece, right? So when we smooth, you can see the intersection there is smoothed. So we're going to smooth this out first, and then we will start sculpting. And we're sculpting what we see, which is always a good thing to remember as artists. And what I'm seeing, I positioned the reference using PureRef in the upper left corner. And I'm going to focus on blocking in the facial features and a little bit of the neck. And the way to think about that, I'm getting the eyes in there now. The way to think about this is in terms of primary, secondary, and tertiary shapes. If you haven't heard that before, that terminology, it's something we use a lot in VFX. And primary shapes are the large shapes. The large shapes are the ones that define the silhouette. So when you look at the edge of the object, if I were to push and pull this around, these would be primary shapes. Shapes that don't affect the silhouette as much and are smaller, sort of medium size. Those are secondary shapes. Tertiary shapes would be pores and wrinkles and creases and things like that are small. At this stage, we're still in the blocking stage of modeling. So I'm primarily thinking about, these large and medium shapes here. Another thing to note is that I'm using the clay buildup brush. This is the most important brush in ZBrush. If you haven't sort of adapted this to your workflow yet, I would highly recommend doing that. And the reason is that it just works really well to be able to sculpt volume and also remove volume. But in addition to that, it leaves these nice sort of striations in the surface. And that lets you just add all this really nice organic detail. And that really helps with realism, which is the name of the game in VFX for the most part. So you want your surface, even if it's a very sort of smooth looking object, when you're trying to create realism, there's usually some noise or irregularity to the surface. And especially when you're doing characters, that's really important that you want to have that sort of organic feel to your model. I'm sculpting in the eye sockets here. So you can see that I'm building up that clay buildup sort of texture on the mesh at the same time that I'm building up and refining the primary and secondary forms. I'm starting to block in the nose. Right, so we have the nostrils and also thinking about the upper lip or the filstrum. And I'm referring back to the ZBrush image plane, and it's doing this in ZBrush is a little bit it's not ideal, right? It's a little bit wonky. This is something that can be improved a lot, but it is helpful. Like I was able to place the mouth roughly in position. But every time you want to get rid of the image plane, you have to hit this new document hotkey or button. And you can't zoom in like you can in Maya. In Maya, there's a 2D zoom where you can get your camera closer. So So defining the lips and some of the other features of the model. There's a distinctive sort of crease where the bridge of the nose meets the cheek. It's almost very geometric. So I'm blocking that in. And then also using the move brush to try to sort of keep the proportions and shape. And much of this is by eye, but what we're going to do is we're going to go back to Maya and just use the nice setup that we have there in order to make sure that we don't stray too far from the concept and that the features continue to line up. Yeah, so continuing to just sort of quickly block in all the facial features. I think speed is something that's important here. This should be a pretty fast sort of process. It's not something that you have to sort of slow down and take time with. So I define the edge of the lips using Dam Standard in reverse. So it creates this kind of ridge. And then I'm using clay buildup to sort of fill in the volume there and define the lips. We're still, we've dynamesh this. We're up to 2.1 million polygons. So that's enough to do this kind of detail. Working on the lips more. It's often useful to create masks. And I'm starting to incorporate smooth. And this is a point where we've talked about the clay buildup brush, adding all this nice sort of subtle detail. So when you use smooth, you do want to do it fairly selectively, right? You don't want to hit your entire model with the smooth brush and then lose all of that nice detail that we're getting for free from the clay buildup. There's some people that advocate for not using smooth at all, and that's fine as well. I do get really good results with smooth, and it's a very fast way to work. But you don't want to make your brush too big using smooth. I think keeping it small helps to sort of keep some of that detail. what I'm doing here, this is interesting. So in PureRef, you can flip images, which is a great feature. And I can now sort of compare that to whatever side of the face I'm looking at. So in this case, I'm looking at the right side of the face, so I can compare that to the reference. And I did that because I'm working on the eyes. And that's more visible on that side of the concept art. You can see how useful it is to have those eyeball spheres in place. It's very, very helpful for blocking out the eyelids. And the entire time I'm doing this, I'm trying to think about how this is going to work mechanically when the character needs to close the eyes or do a blink. And going back and checking according to the camera. And working on the silhouette. You see, it's a little bit difficult to do that in ZBrush because we can't zoom in. So it's a bit awkward. Trying to establish the jawline and underneath the chin. And just kind of jumping around to different areas of the model, which I think is a good practice. Again, the clay buildup is just really, really good for blocking in these shapes. And you can see we're establishing a flow to the surface as well. And that kind of hints at the underlying muscles and skeletal structure. Defining the cheekbones. And I'm trying to think about, again, the silhouette of the character. Right, so here working on the back of the head. And trying to just sort of guess at the size and shape. of things that we can't see in the concept art. Some of what you see me doing here is based on looking at the concept, but part of it also has to do with just having a working knowledge of anatomy. And that's very helpful because I can generally know what a facial feature is supposed to look like and how it fits into the surroundings. If you ever draw faces, that's actually very useful for that knowledge. This is where we ended up, which is an initial sort of pass in ZBrush. Creating a likeness and matching the silhouette and proportions. What I'm going to do next is really fun, which is to add the ears. And what I'm doing here is trying to be a little bit technical about the placement. So I'm looking through the camera, the concept art camera, and I'm just sort of marking positions by painting a mask. And this will let me know in when I rotate the camera around in 3D where the ear is roughly located on the head. And this worked really well and just gave me a very fast, sort of accurate way to place the ear without having to nudge it around too much. And I'm using the insert multi-mesh to just insert a sphere. And we'll sculpt that separately for convenience, and then eventually merge it together using dynamesh. All right, so we've got a rough position and we dynamesh the sphere. And then Snakehook works really well for this because you can drag something out very, very fluidly and get that curvature to what you're pulling out. And then I'm just working with this by eye for the moment and trying to match what I see of the shape. And then I've also just started to indicate how it flows into the skull. I really liked her ears. I thought this was a very cool sort of feature that defines her personality. There I'm using the rotate brush to get the right angle. So it lines up to the concept art. And as always, relying on clay buildup. When you're sculpting a thin object like an ear, you want to make sure you have back face mask on, which I do. There's these really cool, just kind of tentacles, I would call it, that come off the tip of the ear. And I think that's a part of her sensory system. So continuing to just sort of fit these onto the head and jumping back and forth between the head mesh and the ear. And you can see how useful it is to keep these separate for a certain amount of time. And just jumping back to the concept art, checking the size and shape and silhouette. And this can be very quick. This is sped up, but I think the length or the amount of time it took me was about 15 minutes to just sort of block these in. At this point, we're going to combine the ears and the head using dynamesh. So I've merged those together and then dynameshed them both. And now you can see that we can sculpt across both forms because they're combined into a single geometry shell. And this is just, it's a wonderful feature of ZBrush. It's just a very, very nice way to work. So working on the intersections and just blending the ear into the head. I'm also thinking about next steps here. And the goal of this is not to get a perfect result yet. We're still kind of in the rough draft stage. But what's going to happen here soon is that I'm going to send this back to Maya. And that's when we can really sort of zoom in and check our proportions and make sure all the features line up to the concept art. And there's a couple ways to do that. One is to decimate. All right, so you can take your high res mesh. This is 2.3 million, and you can decimate it and send it to Maya that way. But I think the better way is what I'm doing here is to use ZRemesher. And that will give you a lighter mesh that isn't as complicated. And you can also see through it better because it's a lower polygon mesh and you can see through the polygons because it's not so dense. And ZRemesher works pretty well right out of the box without doing anything. But there are a couple ways that you can help it. And I'm using one way here, which turns out to be an exercise in futility. And what I'm noticing is I'm not getting nice, edge loops around the lips and probably the eyes and other areas. So I'm going to, even though this isn't final topology, this is going to be temp. I'm going to try to spend just a few minutes getting a better ZRemesh out of it. And the first way I'm going to try is using the ZRemesh curve brush. Speed this up a little bit. So this is a ZRemesh guide. That's what it's called. And this is made to work with ZRemesher. So it's a brush in ZBrush that lets you draw out a curve. And that informs ZRemesher and helps it to have topology that has loops that you want. But it has never worked very well. And I think I tried it here just to see if, something had improved, but it still kind of sucks. So I'll let this play and just to demonstrate why we don't use this. We actually, fortunately, there's a much better way to get your topology to work well, and that's by using polygroups. So I'm going to get frustrated with this and then switch to polygroups here in just a few minutes. This is me pulling up the documentation to figure out how to delete a curve, which is by drawing another curve that goes through it. It's kind of funny. So I'm trying this again, and it kind of helps, but you often wind up with stretched out polygons, and it doesn't really do what you want. And it kind of halfway ignores your guides. So just it's not the best. So I've now given up on that, and I'm going to make some polygroups for the different facial areas. And a really good way to do that is by drawing masks. So I'm switching to the mask paint mode. And you can do this pretty quickly, at least at this stage. Because again, this is just temp topology. We'll do the final topology later using Quadra in Maya. And I've kept some of the curves in there just to see if they help at all. But this is how you can sort of force it to respect, the lips in this case. And you have to turn on, there's a button over there for keep groups. Still not particularly happy with, with the curves. I did take that to Maya, but then I decided it's worth it to do just a little bit better, more careful of a job on this. So I'm actually going to mask out a number of different areas on the face, and that can help quite a bit with lining up facial features, as we'll see here. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit, and we're going to create polygroups on the face. I've switched to the skin shader because it's a lot easier to see your polygroups. You see here I'm doing the insides of the nostrils. And it's very useful in Maya because we'll get an edge loop that aligns to the edge of that feature of the nostril. So we can use that for alignment. And we're also going to do a nice visualization trick, which is that each of these polygroups can get a separate material in Maya. So we'll show that here shortly. So I've done the eye sockets as well. And there's the forehead and the nose. And you'll see I'm just continuing to isolate the largest piece, which is the head. And this way we're able to just go piece by piece. Here we're doing the upper eyelid. And I'm trying to go very quickly, but then also just fix any tiny tiny groups of polygons that are sort of left out, so we don't wind up with a small disconnected polygroup. If you click on the exact shared edge of two polygroups, you can isolate both of them. Just trying to track down those little tiny single polygon that got left out. And now that we have these, we just make sure keep groups is checked, and you'll see we get a really much better result using this. So We get much better edge loops, better definition. I would never do final topology using ZRemesher, but you can often get a very good head start if you want. And then obviously this is for aligning facial features, which is really useful. And the trick with this is we're also going to do a UV unwrap. And you can see in ZBrush here, we're going to get a UV shell per polygroup. And then we can use that in Maya to assign some different materials. So we get a similar sort of colored look that we have in ZBrush. And I'm exporting in FBX. And we're back in Maya. There's a way in Maya, I have my shelf there, and I was toggling backface culling. So backface culling, if you've never used that, it hides the faces that are not facing the camera. And that's really useful here because it unclutters your view and it gives you much better visibility. Much of the blocking stage of creating a character is about visibility. Visibility is really important. You have to be able to see what you're doing as an artist. I've created some different basic materials that just have colors. And what I'm doing is selecting by UV shell and then assigning those materials. And there we have it. And you can see how these are useful already. Looking through the concept art camera, we can really see where the shape of the mesh is sort of deviated from the concept. And that's a great example here with the eyelids. So we're going to adjust those and fit them to the concept art. I've seen a lot of artists really struggle with this, even very good artists, because they try to sculpt by eye. They try to look at a concept art image and then just sculpt what they see. But no matter how good someone is, it usually doesn't quite match. And that's where you end up with kind of odd looking sculpts, especially of celebrities. You see this a lot where you'll see a popular celebrity and someone has made a sculpt of them, but it doesn't really look like them. And it's because they're not following a process like this, where there's a verification that the proportions are actually accurate. And especially with humans and celebrities, people are very, very attuned. Our brains are attuned to recognize faces. So it's really hard to get away with even slight differences in the shape of someone's face. But this is a really great technique for fixing that. And you can see I'm using the sculpt tools in Maya. Again, these are great, and you can nudge things around in both viewports here. And I'm using symmetry. Trying to move the ear just to match that very nicely. One issue that we run into is that concept art is very rarely symmetrical. So what we have to do as artists is sort of average out any differences between the left and right side. And we also have to look at it, aesthetically and just make choices that that make the character look good. So, for instance, the cheekbones and the orbital ridge on this concept doesn't quite match from left to right. So I'm keeping symmetry, but just finding kind of a happy medium between the two sides. So as I was working away in Maya, I noticed that I still, was having trouble seeing both the concept art edges and the features of the mesh. And there's another step that we can go through, which will get even better visibility. So jumping over to Photoshop, what we can do is actually paint or draw curves that are highly visible on the concept. So that's what I'm doing here. And the nice thing about curves is you can sort of move them around. This is the path tool. So I'm using a 1 pixel red stroke. And I'm going to do this for all the major features. So I'll just speed this up a little bit. We can also increase visibility by reducing the opacity of the concept art. And we're going to save this out as a alternate version that we can use in Maya. Now that we have our feature lines in Maya, we can continue lining up the features and improving the match. And right off the bat, you can really see that we were off quite a bit. And this is a really great step to take, drawing these feature lines. You can see I'm lining up the bridge of the nose and the eye orbital ridge with the red line. And if you don't have that red line, it's actually really hard to see where that feature is. So this is a great step to take. It's not always necessary for every character, but I think for a lot of situations, this is very good. So I'm using the move brush in Maya, and then also I'll tend to smooth things out. And there's a couple different smooth brushes. There's the default one, and then there's one where it tries to keep the shape of the mesh. So I'll use both of those. I had actually misplaced the lower eyelid there, so fixing that up. It becomes really clear where things are supposed to go with our feature lines in red. Now working on the lips. And this is an example where you can see the right side swoops down. And I'm choosing to sort of ignore that side, and I've kept the left side to be true. And getting a really nice alignment with the ear. You know, again, thanks to that red line. So we're just toggling back and forth, taking a look at the eyes. And I've pulled up some reference here. When you have a concept art from this angle, it doesn't tell you about the depth of the eyelids. So you kind of have to figure that out. And I'm actually just sort of checking anatomy and seeing if I need to pull and push the orbital ridge and the top of the upper eyelid. And I'm switching to the soft select for that. And I think we'll refine that further, you know, heading back to ZBrush. Also continuing to think about how the eyelid is going to blink. Right? So making sure there's enough topology there and that the eyelids are forward enough and that there's enough depth there. I took a break and went over to Houdini and constructed the final eyeball. So I'll do a separate video series on that, and you can find that in the playlist. But you can see the difference is that there's a corneal bulge, which is a really important feature for characters. Adds a lot of nice realism, and it really makes the eye work well. It makes the iris refract properly. And it gives you a very nice landmark modeling for the size of the iris. And now that we have these eyes in place, we can work a bit more in Maya, just defining the eyelids and making sure that we have a clean intersection between the eye and the eyelid. And really going to try to line up that edge loop closely. And we want a very sort of consistent and clean eyelid. That's not lumpy, right? Should have a uniform thickness, and it should flow nicely around the cornea. And again, having this different coloration on either side of that edge loop is great. It's very helpful. And this is where it's okay to stray a little bit from the concept, because the concept, might not be accurate. And we're more concerned with, we know that we have to have the eyelids wrap around the eye. So that's a bit more important than matching the concept one-to-one. I made some slight adjustments in Houdini to the eye. So there's a bit of a back and forth process there.